Thank you very much. Good evening and welcome back to this broadcast. It's delightful to be with you yet again on this Thursday. We would like to continue on the line of thought we started exploring last week. We kept it as a very simple phrase, which is keeping it simple. And I thought the introduction last week gave us the reason why we ought to keep things simple. And the suggestion is that there are, too many complicated things, too many difficult scenarios, situations that exist all over the place. Our world, and if you bring it home, you can say personal situations can be difficult at times, can be complex even. So the more simplicity that we can bring into our affairs, the better I believe it will be for each one of us. And if you recall, if you've had a chance to look at the broadcast again, or you are on the live stream, we highlighted the importance of light, how that when it was dark and chaotic, God's answer was to introduce light. That's why scriptures in 2 Corinthians chapter 4 verse 6 says, "For God, who commanded light to shine out of darkness, has shined in our hearts to give the light of the knowledge of the glory of God displayed in the face of Jesus." This is important. Now, we want to move on from that foundation we tried to lay last week and look at another aspect of this, which is still keeping things simple, keeping it simple, or you can say simplicity, if you want just one word to capture our intention. Bringing simplicity to life. And I want to read a portion of scripture which is going to introduce what our focus is. The aspect of this subject we want to look at is asking the right questions or asking good questions. Because sometimes we don't become skillful at asking the right questions. Sometimes you can imagine that we get better at asking questions the more we do so. So we'll start with attempt to know, a genuine attempt to learn. Or might it be taking a cynical position? Someone can ask a question not because they wish to know, but because they're just cynical. And someone can ask a question as a way to highlight or to demonstrate that they actually know, they are expert, and they just want to perhaps embarrass the other party who they believe to be ignorant. I'm sure we can come up with a lot of reasons why, or a lot of scenarios or motivations for asking questions. But I'm sure whenever you or anyone else asks questions, there's always a motive that's behind it. Why you ask that question? But I will keep it simple and look at, or if you like, we can highlight a more positive motivation that sits behind asking questions. So the assumption here is we're looking at asking questions for the right reasons. So now I will take just a few, maybe one verse or two from the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. And I'll read verse 3. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Now, look at this scenario. And to just paint the picture, to share the context, this was a conversation between God and Ezekiel. God, as it were, took Ezekiel to a valley that was full of bones, or God by His Spirit led him. This might well be in a vision. God led him to see a valley that was full of bones. And God then asked a question. Son of man, can these bones live? And the response of Ezekiel was very instructive. Ezekiel said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Why did God ask Ezekiel this question? Might it be to check out Ezekiel's attitude? If Ezekiel had a disposition that would lead him to quickly show off his learnings, his studies, his knowledge, maybe he might have started talking and offering solutions. If Ezekiel was a typical analyst, I'm sure he will have analyzed the dryness of the bones and come up with some good analysis, and then maybe come up with some conclusions. If Ezekiel was an investigator of some sort, I'm sure he will have his approach. If Ezekiel was someone who is very cynical, he must have said, he must have responded with a question, as if to put God in his place. Sorry, I'm saying that with every respect. So he might have done that as if to show, look, why do you even ask me that kind of question? But Ezekiel appeared to understand who it was he was dealing with. So he said, Sovereign Lord, a recognition of the personality of God, the nature of God, the capacity of God. Said, you alone know. So in this scenario, it was God that was asking man questions. Can these bones live? But then if I take a step back and look at that scenario, if someone went to a valley that was full of bones, and we understand going further in that passage that this was actually a picture, an analogy of the state of the nation, where there were so many dry bones. You could say dire situations, hopeless situations, difficult situations that affected people as well as everything in their nation. So you can look at that and think, you know what? This is just an impossible case. Why bother? Let's not even waste our time. And Ezekiel might have said, I just don't think this can live. Because I look at it, I look at them, and I just don't see any way out. But Ezekiel was demonstrating a certain kind of disposition that I know I'm dealing with someone who has capabilities that are just you I just can't predict what you can do. So we're saying, Sovereign Lord, you can do anything you wish. So only you know if this can live. He might have been saying, left to me alone, I don't know and I'm not sure. But I'm sure you have something up your sleeve. So you alone know. I guess this opened up a lot of possibilities, and then God started to do what he could do as a sovereign. Sovereign Lord that Ezekiel rightly called him. But that's one. Let's put this in one bucket. And then don't forget, we're talking about asking good questions or the right questions. Now, in this case, it was the Lord asking man. How about other scenarios? Let's look at Matthew chapter 13. And I'm going to pick a verse and I will talk about the context. So Matthew chapter 13 and verse 10. The disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the people in parables? Okay, and you can see that the roles are now turned. The disciples were now asking their Lord and Master a question. This man is now asking the Lord. And the question was, why do you speak to the people in parables? Well, before I talk about the context here, I'd like to suggest that whenever a question is asked, it shows an interest in uncovering the current situation, discussion, going deeper, going further. That is, we've not closed this case. We want to see, we want to explore, we want to investigate. We're interested. There's probably more to this, so let's ask the question. A question takes you further into the mind of someone. You want to know what the motivations, the rationale, perhaps find an answer, or find direction, or find the next course of action. That's why you would ask a question. Maybe some other question, some other rationales will be applicable. But whenever you ask a question, you're not just satisfied with the matter at a glance or in plain sight. You want to go a bit further to understand. So this question, the disciples came to him and asked, why do you speak to the parables, to the people in parables? A question takes observation to another level, because you can observe and say, well, we see that you always speak to the people in parables. Fair enough. There must be a reason, but, well, it's all right. We'll live with it. But someone who's asking a question is not just observing. Sometimes observation is not quite enough. Observation can lead you to making your own assumptions without really understanding the motivation. That's why I would say observation may be a good place to start, which is evidently what is depicted here. They had seen Jesus speaking to people in parables. So that's been observed. But the question is, why? So they asked him, why do you do what you do? You see, if Jesus was opposed to people asking questions. He might have said, why are you asking me this? Couldn't you observe? I mean, is it not enough for you to just observe? Or he might have said, well, go and figure it out. Or maybe he would have said, just leave me alone. But to demonstrate that he was pleased with the fact that they were interested, they wanted to know, he then opened a whole line of conversation. It was as if these students had opened up a dam and the water was just gushing out. So look at what Jesus said. He replied. He did not ignore them. He did not shun them. He did not dismiss them. He replied. The reply was very emphatic. Because, he said, the knowledge of the secret of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. And Jesus explained even further. He said, whoever has will be given more. Whoever has what? Whoever has interest, desire. So Jesus understood or was highlighting to them that it will have taken desire, another level of interest or some level of interest for you to have asked the questions in the first place. Given that you already have the pre-qualifications as disciples, but being students does not automatically mean that you'll be given all the information. As a matter of fact, only the students that ask questions are entitled to having the extra information that may be in the mind of the teacher. Because what a question does is it opens you up to a whole new world that you might not have have had access to otherwise. So here, because they wanted to know, Jesus said, I will tell you. He said, because the knowledge of the secrets of the kingdom of heaven has been given to you, but not to them. Whoever has will be given more, and they will have an abundance. Whoever does not have, i.e., does not have any interest or any desire, what they have will be taken from them. So this is why I speak to them in parables. And he went on that those seeing, they do not see, hearing, they do not hear. And he went and said, but blessed are your eyes because they see, and your ears because they hear. Now, I wonder if these students did not ask these questions, would any of this insight have come out? Probably not. In fact, more than likely not. This is why asking questions is, such a valuable tool to uncover a lot of insight that would gladly sit there without any access, unless by a heart that is inquisitive, that's interested, that is investigative, and that is full of desire. Do you know that Jesus might have treated his own students just like he treated those who are outside? Simply because even though they had access to him, they would not ask questions. And I think this scenario is even better than the one in Ezekiel. Ezekiel too had a good attitude, but saying, I'm not quite sure these bones will live, but you know. And I suspect that his attitude was not just that of, well, you know, and I don't care. I think it was more of, you know, maybe his body language. Now, I wasn't there. I put my hand up. But why did God go ahead to then start to unveil the fact that these bones could indeed live? I presume, now I have no evidence for this, but I'm just kind of looking at it from a rational point of view, that Ezekiel must be one who had an attitude of meekness, someone who wanted to know, someone who was not arrogant. He might have thought, I want to say something, and I only wish I know the answer, but only you know. I suspect that there was already a relationship between Ezekiel and the Lord, that God would happily open up access to possibilities to him. But be that as it may, at least I can see the disposition of these students here. They were truly desirous. They wanted to know, and they asked the question. The question opened up a dam of information. I mean, a well of information to them. But you could say a river of information, because from that point onwards, Jesus was speaking. Compared to the information he provided ab initio, I mean, everything is said. Initially, if I look at chapter 13 of Matthew from verse 1, all that is said was said in probably just from verse 4 to verse 9, and it stopped. So verse 4 to verse 9, that is 6 chapters, I mean 6 verses, you can say. But the question that these guys had was just a one-liner. But the answer that Jesus gave from that point onwards began from verse 11 right through to verse 23. And it did not stop there. It continued in verse 24 just to expand more on it. It went all the way to verse 51, where he then asked them a question. Have you understood all these things? Look at that. Just one line of question open up a whole barrage of answers from verse 11 to verse 50. What will have happened if they did not ask a question? And look at the whole point of his answer. The objective, the goal of his answer was, for one thing, for them to have understanding. He wanted them to see. He wanted and understand what they were saying. He wanted them to hear and understand what they were hearing. He wanted their mind to be enlarged, to be enlightened. So he asked that question, have you understood all these things? And look at their answer, yes. I mean, you can see, I'm trying to imagine their faces. If someone took you on an exploration to the point that you understood the subject and your questions were answered as well as required, I'm sure you'll see delightful faces. And I can imagine that. Disciples certainly received something that they wouldn't have had. But what led to this was just a demonstration of their willingness to know. How that will have simplified their previous position of ignorance, confusion, wondering. Even if they had been very observant, they might have observed. This is why, I look at the word observe and the word question. both of them have similar, when the first word of observation is O. The first word of question is Q. But you can see that there is something about Q, is that it's not just written as an O, it also has a stroke to it. That stroke is the investigative stroke that grants access to what is beyond the surface. Observation can give you maybe surface level information. And if you're that insightful, maybe you'd observe and pick up some things that are just in between the lines. But a question, when the question is asked in the right way to the right person, can give a whole lot of insight that not or would not be available otherwise. So, and what's the point of all of this? When information or insight or intelligence is presented, the whole intent is to bring understanding. And wherever you have understanding, you have simplification. So Jesus was saying, I wasn't giving you all this information to impress you. No. I am providing this information to bring you to a state of understanding. Because once you understand, what was previously difficult becomes simpler. And simplicity is exactly what you need when you are faced with complexity. You want to simplify things. When something is complex and you don't understand it, you certainly don't have control. Or if something was previously complex and now you understand it, the mind feels empowered as one who has some control, or maybe enough control to then choose the appropriate action. This is why this aspect of asking questions, good questions, right questions, is vital. So, as I said last week, I think an overarching goal for us this year has to be to keep things simple, to find simplicity again. But one instrument to use is asking the right question, asking good questions, or asking questions just as a starting point. Because what a question does is a question is really more about the student than the teacher. Question shows that you are interested. A question can, or should I say, a question can demonstrate whether you are interested enough or not. Question can show whether you have an attitude of meekness or not. Question can reveal whether what is at hand matters to you or not. This is why questions, the right question, ought to be asked. Because it provides the platform that brings necessary help if done in the right way. Now, this is just one or maybe two examples, but you know that there are a lot more examples we could use. But we will keep it at this just to, as a reminder, if you like, but also as some help to not just ask the question, but ask the right question, and also ask the question to the right person. Now, let me put it this way. In the other scenario, it was God that was asking Ezekiel the question. Could Ezekiel have asked the question himself? Maybe, or maybe the situation, the scenario didn't warrant it, perhaps. But I suggest that if we take the position of students or of learners, then our vital tool to open up a whole world of learning, of insight, is to become good questioners, people who ask questions. The power of a student is in fact, let me use the word, the power and the privilege of a student is the tool of ask questions, not to be cynical, no, but to gain understanding. That understanding to bring simplicity to affairs, to solve problems, or at least to understand. I like the way Ecclesiastes says it said, who is as the wise man who understand the nature of things? So a man's wisdom makes his face to shine, and the countenance, the face, the disposition, the demeanor become brightened. It says when you understand the lines of concerns on the face would ease out a bit. And that's really the point of the discussion tonight. Well, I would, as always, like to have some feedback, your thoughts, your insight, and more importantly, I would suggest that begin to ask questions. You know that this is why times we elect mentors, coaches, disciples, not because we're inadequate, even though in reality we always need more. Because if we feel like we are already adequate, that there's nothing more to learn, then there's no point even being in a learning scenario. But you see, it's a recognition that there is yet more to know, there's yet more to understand. And that is not a position of weakness. As a matter of fact, I think it's a position of strength to recognize that I do not yet know all there is to know. There is still more, that everyone has a blind spot or two, and it's an advantage to shed light in areas of darkness. If you remember from last week, we were saying that when God saw that darkness was upon the face of the deep, what he used was the instrument of light. The question is, how do we get that light? And one such means is question. I think the second is implied, which is to observe, which is absolutely fine. But sometimes things are not hidden in plain sight. Or maybe they are hidden in plain sight, but at least they are hidden. That's why you want to ask the question so that you know where the answers are, to find the keys to open the doors, to find the pieces of the puzzle so that we can see the right picture. This is the reason why we ask questions. As a matter of fact, if you ask a good question, you see the good picture. If you ask the right question, you see the right picture. So, which means the better we become even at asking questions, the better the insight, the answers that we begin to uncover. Well, I think we should leave it at that. Thank you for joining us again. As I requested previously, share your thoughts, your insight through our multiple channels, and we look forward to hearing from you. Until next time, I'm going to say good night to you and God bless.